Let's start. Unit 16. Number 1. Dear Mr. Kane. Kane. I am a resident of Kensing Hill Apartments, located right next to the newly opened Voona Dog Park. Voona Kensing Hill. As I live with 3 dogs, I am very happy to let my dogs run around and safely play with other dogs from the neighborhood. However, the noise of barking and yelling from the park at night is so loud and disturbing that I cannot relax in my apartment. Many of my apartment neighbors also seriously complain about this noise. I want immediate action to solve this urgent problem. Since you are the manager of Voona Dog Park, I ask you to take measures to prevent the noise at night. Voona. I hope to hear from you soon. Sincerely, Monty Kim. Monty Kim. Unit 16. Number 2. To the Principal of Alameda High School. Alameda. On behalf of the Youth Soccer Tournament Series, I would like to remind you of the 2019 series next week. 2019. Surely, we understand the importance of a player's education. Regrettably, however, the series will result in players missing 2 days of school for the competition. The games will be attended by many college coaches scouting prospective student athletes. Therefore, the series can be a great opportunity for young soccer players to demonstrate their capabilities as athletes. I would like to request your permission for the absence of the players from your school during this event. Thank you for your understanding. Best regards, Jack D'Adamo, Director of the Youth Soccer Tournament Series. Jack D'Adamo. Unit 16 Exercises. Number 01. Dear Mr. Johnson. Johnson. As you know, your company is in the process of painting the interior of our house at 142 Hanson Street, Cleveland. Cleveland, Hanson Street 142. I am very concerned that the job will not be completed before the contracted deadline of October 31. 1031. The job was to have begun during the last week of September, but your crew did not start until October 5. 105. It is now October 15, and as of this morning, only the kitchen has been painted. 1015. We are due to make a second payment, in the amount of $2,000, on October 16. 10162. I intend to withhold that payment until at least half of the job has been completed, as stated in the contract. I trust that your company will value its agreement and its reputation in the community and will complete the job to our satisfaction by October 31. 1031. Sincerely, Ron Miller. Ron Miller. Unit 16. Number 02. Dear Ms. Butler. Butler. 3 months ago my husband and I booked a cruise to Alaska in July with your agency. 7. We paid our deposit, and the remaining money is due in 2 months. The cost for this cruise was $2,500 per person for a suite with a balcony. 12,500. In recent days we have seen ads from the cruise line indicating significant discounts on upcoming Alaskan cruises, including the trip we have booked. The sale rate is $1,999 per person. 11,999. Please adjust our reservation to reflect the new price. If necessary, we are willing to cancel our first plan and rebook at the new rate. Even with a penalty the price would be lower, but we fully expect your agency will be able to renegotiate the price with the cruise line without a penalty being assessed. Please call me as soon as possible to advise us of the new price. Sincerely, Catherine Carter. Catherine Carter. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 17. Number 1. It was 2 hours before the paper submission. 2. With the deadline close at hand, Claire was still struggling with her writing. Claire. Pressed for time and stuck in a deadlock, she had no idea how to finish the paper. She wasn't even sure whether she could submit it on time. What she found in her paper was scribbled words, half-sentences, and a pile of seemingly strange and disjointed ideas. Nothing makes sense, she said to herself. She looked at her writing and began reading it over and over. All of a sudden and unexpectedly, something was found in that pile of thoughts, the flow and connection of ideas she had not considered while she was writing. From this moment, the ticking of the clock sounded encouraging to her. Yes, I can do it, Claire said as she grabbed her pencil again. Claire. Unit 17. Number 2. Norm and his friend Jason went on a winter camping trip. Norm Jason. In the middle of the night, Norm suddenly woke up sensing something was terribly wrong. Norm. To his surprise, the stove was glowing red. Norm shook Jason awake and told him to look at the stove. Norm Jason. Jason said he had filled it with every piece of wood he could fit into it. Jason. Norm thought the cabin was going to catch fire. Norm. He started swearing at Jason. Jason. He pulled Jason out of his bed, opened the front door and threw him out into the snow. Jason. Norm yelled out in anger, "Don't come back in until I get this stove cooled off." Norm. 7. Unit 17, No. 01. I was in a treehouse in which I holed up in a snowstorm. I thought maybe I'd never get out of the tree. I had been terrified for 2 days ever since the first blizzard hit the Catskill Mountains. Catskill. When I came up to the sunlight, which I did by simply poking my head into the soft snow and standing up, I laughed at my dark fears. Everything was white, clean, shining, and beautiful. The sky was blue, blue, blue. The hemlock grove was laced with snow, the meadow was smooth and white, and the gorge was sparkling with ice. It was so beautiful and peaceful that I laughed out loud. I guess I laughed because my first snowstorm was over and it had not been so terrible after all. Then I shouted, "I did it!" Unit 17, Exercises. Number 02. At dinner I sat between my grandmother and Aunt Gloria. Gloria. My grandmother, a thin, nervous woman who seldom spoke when my grandfather was present, concentrated during the meal on cutting her ham into small perfect triangles before she ate them. Whenever she passed a dish to me, she asked quietly, "Do you like this, David?" And her question seemed so eager and pathetic that I said yes to everything. David. As a result, my plate was piled high with sweet potatoes and cooked carrots and sliced tomatoes and cottage cheese and kidney beans and comb bread and ham. And I had no appetite. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 18. Number 1. Unless your company offers a class on how to give and receive feedback, don't assume those around you, including your boss, know how to give negative feedback. They may be too aggressive, too direct, maybe even a little mean. Perhaps they are bad at giving feedback because no one ever taught them how. Or perhaps they've had bosses who were bad at giving them feedback. Try to brush aside the stuff that offends or upsets you to really try to hear what they are saying you can do better next time. And if they only tell you things like, "Don't let that happen again," then work to figure out what you can do better next time, so that it doesn't actually happen again. Preparing to solve a problem for next time feels better than getting upset about our failure to solve it this time. Unit 18. Number 2. I am sure you have heard something like, "You can do anything you want, if you just persist long and hard enough." Perhaps you have even made a similar assertion to motivate someone to try harder. Of course, words like these sound good, but surely they cannot be true. Few of us can become the professional athlete, entertainer, or movie star we would like to be. Environmental, physical, and psychological factors limit our potential and narrow the range of things we can do with our lives. Trying harder cannot substitute for talent, equipment, and method, but this should not lead to despair. Rather, we should attempt to become the best we can be within our limitations. We try to find our niche. By the time we reach employment age, there is a finite range of jobs we can perform effectively. Unit 18 Exercises. Number 01. Years ago, an author wrote about his theory that people in the workplace eventually rise above their level of competence. This may be the case in some circumstances, but it is far from the norm. My experience has been that most people limit themselves from ever reaching their career potential. They convince themselves that they are happy where they are and have no desire to rise farther. In reality, they are usually afraid of failure or have some other insecurity that prevents them from risking another career move. They either forgot or never learned that the capacity of ordinary humans to achieve extraordinary success lies within themselves. Don't shortchange your life. Aim high, because we usually hit what we aim at. Unit 18. Number 02. We never seem to doubt that an animal acting hungry feels hungry. What reason is there to disbelieve that an elephant who seems happy is happy? We recognize hunger and thirst while animals are eating and drinking, exhaustion when they tire, but deny that they are experiencing joy and happiness as they're playing with their children and their families. The science of animal behavior has long operated with that bias, and that's unscientific. In science, the simplest interpretation of evidence is often the best. When elephants seem joyous in joyful contexts, joy is the simplest interpretation of the evidence. Their brains are similar to ours, they make the same hormones involved in human emotions, and that's evidence, too. So let's not assume. But let's not bury evidence. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 19. Number 1. In retrospect, it might seem surprising that something as mundane as the desire to count sheep was the driving force for an advance as fundamental as written language. But the desire for written records has always accompanied economic activity, since transactions are meaningless unless you can clearly keep track of who owns what. As such, early human writing is dominated by wheeling and dealing, a collection of bets, bills, and contracts. Long before we had the writings of the prophets, we had the writings of the prophets. In fact, many civilizations never got to the stage of recording and leaving behind the kinds of great literary works that we often associate with the history of culture. What survives these ancient societies is, for the most part, a pile of receipts. If it weren't for the commercial enterprises that produced those records, we would know far, far less about the cultures that they came from. Unit 19. Number 2. Think of a buffet table at a party, or perhaps at a hotel you've visited. You see platter after platter of different foods. You don't eat many of these foods at home, and you want to try them all. But trying them all might mean eating more than your usual meal size. The availability of different types of food is one factor in gaining weight. Scientists have seen this behavior in studies with rats. Rats that normally maintain a steady body weight when eating one type of food eat huge amounts and become obese when they are presented with a variety of high-calorie foods, such as chocolate bars, crackers, and potato chips. The same is true of humans. We eat much more when a variety of good-tasting foods are available than when only one or two types of food are available. Unit 19 Exercises. Number 01. In a representative sample of more than 600 Americans, personal spending accounted for the lion's share of most people's budgets. 600. The average ratio of personal to pro-social spending was more than 10 to 1. 101. But the amount of money individuals devoted to themselves was unrelated to their overall happiness. What did predict happiness? the amount of money they gave away. The more they invested in others, the happier they were. This relationship between pro-social spending and happiness held up even after taking into account individuals' income. Amazingly, the effect of this single spending category was as large as the effect of income in predicting happiness. If you've been focusing on trying to make more money, remember that giving some of it away can be just as rewarding as getting more of it. Unit 19. Number 02. For cartoon characters, the laws of the real world don't apply. In a cartoon world, heavy things can be picked up effortlessly, appearances can change in a blink of an eye, and anything becomes possible with a clap of the hands or the press of a magic button. What would it be like if you and I lived in such a world? Research has shown that simply imagining yourself in a situation where the rules of regular life don't apply can greatly increase your creativity. By imagining yourself living as a cartoon, you allow your imagination to pursue the childlike ideas that creativity thrives on. As a cartoon character, you can think of interesting ways to solve problems and spend your time. Almost anything is possible. By imagining how cartoon you would act, you can link your imaginative findings to the real world and uncover ways to be more creative in real life. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 20. Number 1. Human beings do not enter the world as competent moral agents. Nor does everyone leave the world in that state. But somewhere in between, most people acquire a bit of decency that qualifies them for membership in the community of moral agents. Genes, development, and learning all contribute to the process of becoming a decent human being. The interaction between nature and nurture is, however, highly complex, and developmental biologists are only just beginning to grasp just how complex it is. Without the context provided by cells, organisms, social groups, and culture, DNA is inert. Dina. Anyone who says that people are genetically programmed to be moral has an oversimplified view of how genes work. Genes and environment interact in ways that make it nonsensical to think that the process of moral development in children, or any other developmental process, can be discussed in terms of nature versus nurture. Developmental biologists now know that it is really both, or nature through nurture. A complete scientific explanation of moral evolution and development in the human species is a very long way off. Unit 20. Number 2. The practice of medicine has meant the average age to which people in all nations may expect to live is higher than it has been in recorded history, and there is a better opportunity than ever for an individual to survive serious disorders such as cancers, brain tumors, and heart diseases. However, longer lifespans mean more people, worsening food and housing supply difficulties. In addition, medical services are still not well distributed, and accessibility remains a problem in many parts of the world. Improvements in medical technology shift the balance of population, to the young at first, and then to the old. They also tie up money and resources in facilities and trained people, costing more money, and affecting what can be spent on other things. Unit 20 Exercises. Number 01. In one experiment, participants in a wine auction were asked to write down the last 2 digits of their social security numbers before bidding. Although these numbers were essentially random and certainly had nothing to do with the value a buyer should place on the wine, researchers nevertheless found that the higher the numbers, the more people were willing to bid. This effect affects all sorts of estimates that we make, from estimating the number of countries in the African Union to how much money we consider to be a fair tip or donation. Whenever you receive a solicitation from a charity with a suggested donation amount or a bill with pre-computed tip percentages, you should suspect that the requester is anchoring your initial estimate of what is fair by suggesting amounts on the high side. Even if you subsequently adjust your estimate downward because, say, a 25% tip seems like too much, you will probably end up giving more than you would have without the initial suggestion. 25%. Unit 20. Number 02. In the current hyper-competitive, advertising-polluted environment, you pay more and get less for your marketing dollar, which means that it costs you more to attract customers than ever before. Yet you are likely putting the majority of your marketing dollars into some form of local mass advertising. You might use your daily newspaper or other print media, local broadcast or cable television, radio, billboards or other outdoor media, and, most likely, you're in the yellow pages. Each one of these traditional advertising media has suffered an erosion of its effectiveness. This downward trend, coupled with the ever-increasing proliferation of marketing choices, is likely to continue. Realizing that your local mass media has lost some of its muscle, you've probably experimented with other forms of marketing, such as the internet, direct mail, telemarketing, sponsorships, event promotions, and even handing out pens, coffee cups, and t-shirts with your logo on them. Despite all this investment in your marketing, you've probably not been happy with your results. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 21. Number 1. Radioactive waste disposal has become one of the key environmental battlegrounds over which the future of nuclear power has been fought. Environmentalists argue that no system of waste disposal can be absolutely safe, either now or in the future. Governments and the nuclear industry have tried to find acceptable solutions. But in countries where popular opinion is taken into consideration, no mutually acceptable solution has been found. As a result, most spent fuel has been stored in the nuclear power plants where it was produced. This is now causing its own problems as storage ponds designed to store a few years' waste become filled or overflowing. One avenue that has been explored is the reprocessing of spent fuel to remove the active ingredients. Some of the recovered material can be recycled as fuel. The remainder must be stored safely until it has become inactive. But reprocessing has proved expensive and can exacerbate the problem of disposal rather than assisting it. As a result, it too appears publicly unacceptable. Unit 21. Number 2. In the 1930s, the work of Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, began to be widely known and appreciated. 1930 Sigmund Freud. Less well known at the time was the fact that Freud had found out, almost by accident, how helpful his pet dog Jofi was to his patients. Freud Jofi. He had only become a dog lover in later life when Jofi was given to him by his daughter Anna. Freud Anna Jofi. The dog sat in on the doctor's therapy sessions, and Freud discovered that his patients felt much more comfortable telling about their problems if the dog was there. Freud. Some of them even preferred to talk to Jofi, rather than the doctor. Freud, Jofi. Freud noted that if the dog sat near the patient found it easier to relax, but if Jofi sat on the other side of the room, the patient seemed more tense and distressed. Freud, Jofi. He was surprised to realize that Jofi seemed to sense this too. Jofi. The dog's presence was an especially calming influence on child and teenage patients. Unit 21 Exercises. Number 01. Even a duck can be a hero. On November 27, 1944, the Allies launched an air attack against Freiburg, Germany. 1944-1127 Freiburg. Unfortunately, the town's air raid sirens weren't working. The local inhabitants would not have had a chance for survival had it not been for a vocal duck who lived in Freiburg's main park. Freiburg. The residents had noticed that just before an air raid, animals would sometimes begin vocalizing hysterically, as if they somehow sensed the distant bombers long before the warning system. On this occasion, although the sirens failed, the duck's furious squawking drove many hundreds of people into the air raid shelters. Unfortunately, the duck was killed in the bombing, but after the war, when Freiburg was rebuilt, the survivors commemorated their web-footed savior with a monument in the new park. Freiburg. Unit 21. Number 02. Today, we are beginning to return to wild places to search for new drugs and new crops. Given our domesticated and dulled senses of taste and smell, however, we now screen the forest for promising plants in a time-consuming way. Instead of innately sensing the best, we collect it all and painstakingly sort through it. Given the rapid acceleration of plant extinctions, we no longer have time for this approach. There are more than 400,000 plants and as many unique chemicals that we have yet to explore as possible medicines or foods. 40. Before they're all gone, we need to consult the talented taste buds of wild experts and fur-covered pharmacists. They have, after all, been native to this place for millions of years, longer than even our agronomist. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 22. Number 1. Here's an interesting thought. If glaciers started reforming, they have a great deal more water now to draw on Hudson Bay, the Great Lakes, the hundreds of thousands of lakes of Canada, none of which existed to fuel the last ice sheet, so they would grow very much quicker. Hudson. And if they did start to advance again, what exactly would we do? Blast them with TNT or maybe nuclear missiles? TNT? Well, doubtless we would, but consider this. In 1964, the largest earthquake ever recorded in North America rocked Alaska with 200,000 megatons of concentrated might, the equivalent of 2,000 nuclear bombs. 1964-220. Almost 3,000 miles away in Texas, water sloshed out of swimming pools. 3. A street in Anchorage fell 20 feet. 20. The quake devastated 24,000 square miles of wilderness, much of it glaciated. 24. And what effect did all this might have on Alaska's glaciers? None. 210, none. Unit 22. Number 2. The body tends to accumulate problems, often beginning with one small, seemingly minor imbalance. This problem causes another subtle imbalance, which triggers another, then several more. In the end, you get a symptom. It's like lining up a series of dominoes. All you need to do is knock down the first one and many others will fall too. What caused the last one to fall? Obviously it wasn't the one before it, or the one before that, but the first one. The body works the same way. The initial problem is often unnoticed. It's not until some of the later dominoes fall that more obvious clues and symptoms appear. In the end, you get a headache, fatigue, or depression or even disease. When you try to treat the last domino, treat just the end result symptom, the cause of the problem isn't addressed. The first domino is the cause, or primary problem. Unit 22 Exercises. Number 01. It is widely believed that AI will take away many traditional jobs in everything from art to healthcare in the future. This might be true, but AI might also help create new human jobs. Instead of humans competing with AI, they could focus on servicing and leveraging AI. For example, the replacement of human pilots by drones has eliminated some jobs but created many new opportunities in maintenance, remote control, data analysis, and cybersecurity. The U.S. Armed Forces need 30 people to operate every unmanned Predator or Reaper drone flying over Syria, while analyzing the resulting harvest of information occupies at least 80 people more. Predator Reaper 3080. In 2015, the U.S. Air Force lacked sufficient trained humans to fill all these positions, and therefore faced an ironic crisis in manning its unmanned aircraft. 2015. Unit 22. Number 02. All professions develop a specialized vocabulary, partly out of necessity when needed language doesn't exist, partly as a means of differentiating themselves. Using specialized language helps when you are talking to a brother or sister professional. Similar speech is confusing when you are talking to outsiders. Because most organizations have employees and external constituencies, such as customers and suppliers, that belong to dozens of professions: mechanical engineers, accountants, market researchers, managers. Whenever jargon is used, some people will understand and feel included while most of the audience will feel confused and left out. Consequently, all widespread communication in a change effort must be jargon-free. When accountants talk only to other accountants, that's a different matter. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 24. Number 1. The Nuer are one of the largest ethnic groups in South Sudan, primarily residing in the Nile River Valley. Nuer, Nile River Valley. The Nuer are a cattle-raising people, whose everyday lives revolve around their cattle. Nuer. They have various terms related to cattle, so they can distinguish between hundreds of types of cows, based on color, markings, and shape of horns. They prefer to be called by the names of the cattle they raise. The commonest daily foods for the Nuer are dairy products, especially milk for the young and soured milk, like yogurt, for adults. Nuer. And wild fruits and nuts are favorite snacks for the Nuer. Nuer. The Nuer also have a culture of counting only older members of the family. Nuer. They believe that counting the number of children one has could result in misfortune and prefer to report fewer children than they have. Unit 24. Number 2. Alexander Young Jackson, everyone called him AY, was born to a poor family in Montreal in 1882. Alexander Young Jackson, AY, 1882 Montreal. His father abandoned them when he was young, and AY had to go to work at age 12 to help support his brothers and sisters. AY working in a print shop, he became interested in art, and he began to paint landscapes in a fresh new style. Traveling by train across northern Ontario, AY and several other artists painted everything they saw. Ontario, AY. The Group of Seven, as they called themselves, put the results of the tour together to create an art show in Toronto in 1920. Group of Seven 1920 Toronto. That was the show where their paintings were severely criticized as art gone mad. But he kept painting, traveling, and exhibiting, and by the time he died in 1974 at the age of 91, AY Jackson was acknowledged as a painting genius and a pioneer of modern landscape art. 197491 AY Jackson. Unit 24 Exercises. Number 01. Terry Fox was diagnosed with a severe form of cancer at the tender age of 18. Terry Fox 18. His treatment required the amputation of one of his legs. His chances of survival were just 15%. 15%. Fox understandably felt like he had lost control of his life. Fox. But he soon became inspired by a story of someone with a prosthetic leg who ran the New York City Marathon. After his operation, Fox began running and completed a marathon himself. Fox. He then organized a fundraiser that involved running a marathon-length route every day, all the way across Canada. Halfway through his journey, Fox got sick. Fox. People were inspired by his courage and ambition and kept donating to his cause even though he had to stop running. He died a few months later but managed to raise $23 million for cancer research. 2,300. In his terrifying situation, Fox focused on what he could control and died in peace as a result. Fox. Unit 24. Number 02. Completed in 1997, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao is one of the most important buildings of the end of the 20th century, not only in Spain but also worldwide. 1997 Bilbao Guggenheim 20. This project became inevitably associated with the festive spirit that surrounded the turn of the millennium, which coincided with the city's celebration of its 700th anniversary. 7. This major work of architecture was the product of an intelligent collaboration between the Basque Country Administration and the Solomon R. Guggenheim Foundation. Basque Solomon R. Guggenheim. The former provided the site, logistics, and financing, while the latter contributed with its wonderful contemporary art collections and highly regarded experience as one of the most important art institutions. As part of the partnership agreement with the Basque Country Administration, the foundation reserved the right to select the architect. Basque. After a competition held among a selected list of international architects, the commission was given to Frank O'Gary, one of the most innovative architects of the second half of the 20th century. 20 Frank O'Gary. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 26. Number 1. An interesting aspect of human psychology is that we tend to like things more and find them more appealing if everything about those things is not obvious the first time we experience them. This is certainly true in music. For example, we might hear a song on the radio for the first time that catches our interest and decide we like it. Then the next time we hear it, we hear a lyric we didn't catch the first time, or we might notice what the piano or drums are doing in the background. A special harmony emerges that we missed before. We hear more and more and understand more and more with each listening. Sometimes, the longer it takes for a work of art to reveal all of its subtleties to us, the more fond of that thing, whether it's music, art, dance, or architecture, we become. Unit 26. Number 2. The first underwater photographs were taken by an Englishman named William Thompson. William Thompson. In 1856, he waterproofed a simple box camera, attached it to a pole, and lowered it beneath the waves off the coast of southern England. 1856 England. During the 10-minute exposure, the camera slowly flooded with seawater, but the picture survived. 10. Underwater photography was born. Near the surface, where the water is clear and there is enough light, it is quite possible for an amateur photographer to take great shots with an inexpensive underwater camera. At greater depths it is dark and cold. There photography is the principal way of exploring a mysterious deep-sea world, 95% of which has never been seen before. 95%. Unit 26 Exercises. Number 01. Feet are always changing. If you gain weight, feet widen; if you lose weight, they slim down. Size can vary by 5% daily, depending on whether you are standing, walking, or sitting. 5%. Although most feet stop growing by age 20, they continue to elongate as foot muscles lose tone and broaden as one approaches middle age. 20. The weather causes feet to contract in cold weather and expand in hot weather. The foot becomes more vulnerable to malady and injury with increasing age because of the thinning of the protective fat pad cushioning the skin and bone on the bottom of your feet. Speaking of shoe size, the 16-inch footprint of the semi-mythological creature known as the abominable snowman, or Bigfoot, wandering the North American wilderness would require an incredible size 25 shoe, presumably extra wide. Bigfoot, 1625. Unit 26. Number 02. While the old saying "a picture is worth 1,000 words" may be true, there is another saying among photographers: every photo is a work of fiction. ... Assign 100 photographers to photograph the same thing, and you'll get 100 very different photos. Which is the most accurate? Which photo captures the subject most objectively? Without having seen the actual scene at the time of the photograph, there would be no way to tell. Each photographer has hundreds of choices of lighting, exposure, composition, and techniques. How each photographer chooses to manipulate these variables will affect the overall look of the final photo. So while the picture is worth 1,000 words, the story told will be different every time. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 27. Number 1. Suppose we know that Paula suffers from a severe phobia. Paula. If we reason that Paula is afraid either of snakes or spiders, and then establish that she is not afraid of snakes, we will conclude that Paula is afraid of spiders. Paula. However, our conclusion is reasonable only if Paula's fear really does concern either snakes or spiders. Paula. If we know only that Paula has a phobia, then the fact that she's not afraid of snakes is entirely consistent with her being afraid of heights, water, dogs, or the number 13. Paula. 1-3. More generally, when we are presented with a list of alternative explanations for some phenomenon, and are then persuaded that all but one of those explanations are unsatisfactory, we should pause to reflect. Before conceding that the remaining explanation is the correct one, consider whether other plausible options are being ignored or overlooked. The fallacy of false choice misleads when we're insufficiently attentive to an important hidden assumption, that the choices which have been made explicit exhaust the sensible alternatives. Unit 27. Number 2. Intellectual humility is admitting you are human and there are limits to the knowledge you have. It involves recognizing that you possess cognitive and personal biases, and that your brain tends to see things in such a way that your opinions and viewpoints are favored above others. It is being willing to work to overcome those biases in order to be more objective and make informed decisions. People who display intellectual humility are more likely to be receptive to learning from others who think differently than they do. They tend to be well liked and respected by others because they make it clear that they value what other people bring to the table. Intellectually humble people want to learn more and are open to finding information from a variety of sources. They are not interested in trying to appear or feel superior to others. Unit 27 Exercises. Number 01. Countries vary regarding how much stimulation their citizens are exposed to. One study indicated that the Dutch keep their infants calmer than Americans, who generally expose their babies to more stimulation. In India, children are brought up with a great deal of stimulation, making it challenging for a highly sensitive person. However, even sensitive people in India become more habituated to hearing continuous noise. I interviewed a highly sensitive man from India who had lived in the United States for 5 years. 5. Ramesh reported that the longer he stayed in America, the more acculturated he became to the comparatively quiet atmosphere, and it was difficult for him when he visited India. Ramesh. However, since he was raised in an extremely noisy environment, he told me that he eventually adapted to the overstimulation of his native country, and after some time the excessive noise didn't bother him so much. Unit 27. Number 02. While historically exclusive, tightly connected communities were thought to be beneficial, though there are some theorists that argue the disadvantages of such tight bonds. Indeed, social capital can, and often does, cut both ways. While it can reinforce belonging and community, it can just as easily shut out newcomers, raise barriers to entry, and retard innovation. Adam Smith long ago noted this dilemma in his Wealth of Nations, criticizing merchants who formed tightly knit cliques for precisely such reasons. Adam Smith. Mancur Olson later applied much the same thinking to show how tightly knit communities can isolate themselves from outside pressure and sow the seeds of their own death. Mancur Olson. Or, as Ports and Landau put it, the same strong ties that help members of a group often enable it to exclude outsiders. Portes Landau. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 28. Number 1. The role of science can sometimes be overstated. with its advocates slipping into scientism. Scientism is the view that the scientific description of reality is the only truth there is. With the advance of science, there has been a tendency to slip into scientism, and assume that any factual claim can be authenticated if and only if the term scientific can correctly be ascribed to it. The consequence is that non-scientific approaches to reality, and that can include all the arts, religion, and personal, emotional and value-laden ways of encountering the world, may become labeled as merely subjective, and therefore of little account in terms of describing the way the world is. The philosophy of science seeks to avoid crude scientism and get a balanced view on what the scientific method can and cannot achieve. Unit 28. Number 2. People engage in typical patterns of interaction based on the relationship between their roles and the roles of others. Employers are expected to interact with employees in a certain way, as are doctors with patients. In each case, actions are restricted by the role responsibilities and obligations associated with individuals' positions within society. For instance, parents and children are linked by certain rights, privileges, and obligations. Parents are responsible for providing their children with the basic necessities of life: food, clothing, shelter, and so forth. These expectations are so powerful that not meeting them may make the parents vulnerable to charges of negligence or abuse. Children, in turn, are expected to do as their parents say. Thus, interactions within a relationship are functions not only of the individual personalities of the people involved but also of the role requirements associated with the statuses they have. Unit 28, Exercises. Number 01. Most of us don't know what to do with our anger. Some of us try to put a lid on it, afraid of what we might be capable of if our anger isn't contained. Yet human beings are cracked and dripping vessels, and our anger inevitably leaks out. We do and say things we don't want to do and say. We end up taking our anger out on others, then we regret what we've done and take it out on ourselves. Others of us have become so skilled at burying our anger we don't even know it's there. While this strategy tends to appear healthier, it has significant consequences for our long-term well-being. Suppressing anger requires an enormous amount of psychic effort. It saps our energy and drains our emotional resources, resulting in fatigue at best and depression at worst. Unit 28. Number 02. In psychology, associations are relations between conceptual entities. They are used as a way of revealing concealed symbols of our unconsciousness. We have seen that associations can be created when two stimuli appear together, as it happened to Pavlov's dogs. Pavlov. Another way we create associations is by their resemblance. If we meet someone new, unconsciously the first thing we do is look for any similarities. The brain tries to map a stimulus, in this case the new person, by using already established neural structures, and in so doing, memories or people join together in our mind. Something similar happens to the protagonist of Spellbound, a 1945 psychological mystery thriller film directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock 1945 Spellbound. In this case, in his childhood a traumatic event occurs and it involves a fence that is perfectly outlined by vertical lines. And as an adult, whenever he sees parallel lines he always senses a tragic memory because the lines were forever associated with the painful event. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 29. Number 1. Among the most fascinating natural temperature-regulating behaviors are those of social insects such as bees and ants. These insects are able to maintain a nearly constant temperature in their hives or mounds throughout the year. The constancy of these microclimates depends not just on the location and insulation of the habitat, but on the activity of the insects in the colony. When the surrounding temperature increases, the activity in the hive decreases, which decreases the amount of heat generated by insect metabolism. In fact, many animals decrease their activity in the heat and increase it in the cold, and people who are allowed to choose levels of physical activity in hot or cold environments adjust their workload precisely to body temperature. This behavior serves to avoid both hypothermia and hyperthermia. Unit 29. Number 2. Theseus was a great hero to the people of Athens. Theseus. When he returned home after a war, the ship that had carried him and his men was so treasured that the townspeople preserved it for years and years, replacing its old, rotten planks with new pieces of wood. The question Plutarch asks philosophers is this: is the repaired ship still the same ship that Theseus had sailed? Plutarch, Theseus. Removing one plank and replacing it might not make a difference, but can that still be true once all the planks have been replaced? Some philosophers argue that the ship must be the sum of all its parts. But if this is true, then as the ship got pushed around during its journey and lost small pieces, it would already have stopped being the ship of Theseus. Theseus. Unit 29, Exercises. Number 01. So far, we've lived by the grace of green plants, and we owe both our lives and our lifestyles to them. Consider that everything we consume, from a carrot stick to a peppercorn fillet, is the product of plants turning sunlight into chemical energy. Our cars, our computers, our Christmas tree lights all feed on photosynthesis as well, because the fossil fuels they use are merely the compressed remains of 600 million years worth of plants and animals that grew their bodies with sunlight. 6. All of our petroleum-borne plastics, pharmaceuticals, and chemicals also spring from ancient photosynthesis. In fact, other than rocks and metals, it's hard to find any raw material we use that was not once alive, owing its ultimate existence to plants. Unit 29. Number 02. Both steamboats and steam locomotives reshaped patterns of tourism in a myriad of ways. Due to decreased travel time and cost, more people from the middle and lower classes were enabled to participate. This increase in tourism raised concerns among the earlier generations of tourists. In some cases, these earlier tourists sought new destinations in previously distant or inaccessible places. In other cases, they fought to limit the changes that were taking place at existing destinations. For example, prominent English poet William Wordsworth strongly objected to the proposed rail development in the Lake District on the grounds that it would destroy the natural beauty of the area that he and other visitors came there for. William Wordsworth Lake District. Although this line was not built, rail stations on the periphery of the area nonetheless brought substantial numbers of tourists, who traveled into the area on foot or by coach. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 30. Number 1. Although prices in most retail outlets are set by the retailer, this does not mean that these prices do not adjust to market forces over time. On any particular day we find that all products have a specific price ticket on them. However, this price may be different from day to day or week to week. The price that the farmer gets from the wholesaler is much more flexible from day to day than the price that the retailer charges consumers. If, for example, bad weather leads to a poor potato crop, then the price that supermarkets have to pay to their wholesalers for potatoes will go up, and this will be reflected in the prices they mark on potatoes in their stores. Thus, these prices do reflect the interaction of demand and supply in the wider marketplace for potatoes. Although they do not change in the supermarket from hour to hour to reflect local variations in demand and supply, they do change over time to reflect the underlying conditions of the overall production of and demand for the goods in question. Unit 30. Number 2. We have to recognize that there always exists in us the strongest need to utilize all our attention. And this is quite evident in the great amount of displeasure we feel any time the entirety of our capacity for attention is not being put to use. When this is the case, we will seek to find outlets for our unused attention. If we are playing a chess game with a weaker opponent, we will seek to supplement this activity with another, such as watching TV, or listening to music, or playing another chess game at the same time. TV. Very often this reveals itself in unconscious movements, such as playing with something in one's hands or pacing around the room, and if such an action also serves to increase pleasure or relieve displeasure, all the better. Unit 30, Exercises. Number 01. The history of the development of zoos shows how our relationships with animals have changed over time. Fear was replaced with curiosity and a desire to own and control animals. Our relationships with animals mirror changes in society. As Mahatma Gandhi said, the greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated. Mahatma Gandhi. When human society was hierarchical, the collection of animals was the exclusive practice of the rich and powerful. Later, with enlightenment, came the desire to know more of animals. Collections became important for scientific study, allowing early representations of fanciful beasts to be updated and replaced through detailed studies of both live and dead animals. Unit 30. Number 02. What's in a word? Quite a lot, actually. Language has long been considered a critical vehicle through which we understand and respond to our environment. For example, behavioral economist Keith Chen found a link between the language people speak, as their primary language, and their tendency to save money. Keith Chen. In English, if you are speaking about time, you need to adjust your grammar to reflect whether you are speaking about the past, the present or the future. In Chinese, you speak about the present and the future using the same words. This is not simply about distant languages. English is the only Germanic language that separates time in this way. He found that, when you controlled all other variables, people that speak futureless languages, like Chinese, save more money, 5% more, than those that separate the present from the future tense, because the future is not a separate, distinct thing. 5%. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 31. Number 1. Much of what we do each day is automatic and guided by habit, requiring little conscious awareness, and that's not a bad thing. As Duhigg explains, our habits are necessary mental energy savers. Duhigg. We need to relieve our conscious minds so we can solve new problems as they come up. Once we've solved the puzzle of how to ballroom dance, for example, we can do it by habit, and so be mentally freed to focus on a conversation while dancing instead. But try to talk when first learning to dance the tango, and it's a disaster. We need our conscious attention to focus on the steps. Imagine how little we'd accomplish if we had to focus consciously on every behavior e.g., on where to place our feet for each step we take. Unit 31. Number 2. When we were infants, we were tuned into the signals from our body that told us when to eat and when to stop. We had an instinctive awareness of what foods and how much food our body needed. As we grew older, this inner wisdom became lost in a bewildering host of outer voices that told us how we should eat. We received conflicting messages from our parents, from our peers, and from scientific research. These messages created a confusion of desires, impulses, and aversions that have made us unable to just eat and to eat just enough. If we are to return to a healthy and balanced relationship with food, it is essential that we learn to tune our awareness inward and to hear again what our body is always telling us. Unit 31 Exercises. Number 01. A smaller proportion of people than ever before is stuck in extreme poverty. But there are still at least 800 million people left. 8. Unlike with climate change, we don't need predictions and scenarios. We know that 800 million are suffering right now. 8. We also know the solutions: peace, schooling, universal basic health care, electricity, clean water, toilets, and microcredits to get market forces started. There's no innovation needed to end poverty, and it's all about walking the last mile with what's worked everywhere else. And we know that the quicker we act, the smaller the problem, because as long as people remain in extreme poverty they keep having large families and their numbers keep increasing. Providing these necessities of a decent life, quickly, to the final billion is a clear, fact-based priority. 10. Unit 31. Number 02. When Darwin published his Origin of Species, Kelvin came to the conclusion that it was a mistake. Darwin, Kelvin. He convinced Darwin that the Earth could not be more than 100 million years old, as Darwin had said in the book, because there was no process that could have kept the sun burning that long. Darwin, 1 Darwin. In fact, we now know that the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, 46 times Kelvin's limit. Kelvin 4646. But Darwin was so awed by Kelvin's self-confidence that he removed his discovery from subsequent editions of his manuscript. Darwin Kelvin. In fact, Darwin's deduction for the age of the Earth should have been taken as an indication that Kelvin's model of the Sun was wrong. Darwin Kelvin. Now we know that the Sun derives its heat from nuclear fusion, a process that hadn't yet been discovered. The end. Good job. Let's start. Unit 32. Number 1. Movies may be said to support the dominant culture and to serve as a means for its reproduction over time. But one may ask why audiences would find such movies enjoyable if all they do is give cultural directives and prescriptions for proper living. Most of us would likely grow tired of such didactic movies and would probably come to see them as propaganda, similar to the cultural artwork that was common in the Soviet Union and other autocratic societies. The simple answer to this question is that movies do more than present 2-hour civics lessons or editorials on responsible behavior. They also tell stories that, in the end, we find satisfying. The bad guys are usually punished, the romantic couple almost always find each other despite the obstacles and difficulties they encounter on the path to true love, and the way we wish the world to be is how, in the movies, it more often than not winds up being. No doubt it is this utopian aspect of movies that accounts for why we enjoy them so much. Unit 32. Number 2. A little boy sees and hears birds with delight. Then the good father comes along and feels he should share the experience and help his son develop. He says that's a jay, and this is a sparrow. The moment the little boy is concerned with which is a jay and which is a sparrow, he can no longer see the birds or hear them sing. He has to see and hear them the way the father wants him to. Father has good reasons on his side, since few people can go through life listening to the birds sing, and the sooner the boy starts his education the better. Maybe he will be an ornithologist when he grows up. A few people, however, can still see and hear in the old way. But most of the members of the human race have lost the capacity to be painters, poets, or musicians, and are not left the option of seeing and hearing directly even if they can afford to, they must get it second hand. Unit 32 Exercises. Number 01. Have you ever pushed relentlessly to look for an important item like a pencil or a key you misplaced when you knew it was best to forget about it and wait for it to show up? You do this because it's tough to stop. The moment you try, you become uneasy and nervous. You feel somehow not right without the lost item, as if the whole meaning of your life were in the balance. One method of confronting and conquering this fear is called response prevention. The basic principle is simple and obvious: you refuse to give in to the perfectionistic habit, and allow yourself to become flooded with fear and discomfort. Stubbornly stick it out and do not give in no matter how upset you become. Hang in there and allow your upset to reach its maximum. After a period of time the compulsion will begin to diminish until it disappears completely. Unit 32. Number 02. During the 17th century, more and more cities were building large houses of confinement. 17. The perfect example was the General Hospital of Paris, which, despite its name, wasn't a medical establishment. Instead, it functioned as an administrative institution that housed the mendicant as well as the mad. In other words, the general hospital became a catch-all facility for the city's most inconvenient citizens, beggars, the unemployed, and the insane. As an institution, the general hospital was so effective in cleaning up the Paris streets that, in 1676, the King of France signed an edict that called for the creation of similar establishments in every city. 1676. Later, confinement houses emerged throughout Europe, largely as police-based institutions. In addition to its function as a social cure-all, confinement came with its own economic benefits. In times of reduced wages and high unemployment, confinement houses put problematic residents to work, thereby turning these idle populations into sources of cheap labor. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 33. Number 1. The printing press boosted the power of ideas to copy themselves. Prior to low-cost printing, ideas could and did spread by word of mouth. While this was tremendously powerful, it limited the complexity of the ideas that could be propagated to those that a single person could remember. It also added a certain amount of guaranteed error. The spread of ideas by word of mouth was equivalent to a game of telephone on a global scale. The advent of literacy and the creation of handwritten scrolls and, eventually, handwritten books strengthened the ability of large and complex ideas to spread with high fidelity. But the incredible amount of time required to copy a scroll or book by hand limited the speed with which information could spread this way. A well-trained monk could transcribe around 4 pages of text per day. 4. A printing press could copy information thousands of times faster, allowing knowledge to spread far more quickly, with full fidelity, than ever before. Unit 33. Number 2. By acting on either natural or artificial resources, through techniques, we alter them in various ways. Thus we create artifacts, which form an important aspect of technologies. A clay pot is an example of a material artifact, which, although transformed by human activity, is not all that far removed from its natural state. A plastic cup, a contact lens, and a computer chip, on the other hand, are examples of artifacts that are far removed from the original states of the natural resources needed to create them. Artifacts can serve as resources in other technological processes. This is one of the important interaction effects within the technological system. In other words, each new technology increases the stock of available tools and resources that can be employed by other technologies to produce new artifacts. Unit 33 Exercises. Number 01. Urbanization accompanied modernization and the rapid process of industrialization. Urbanization is the process by which an increasing proportion of a population lives in cities rather than in rural areas. Although cities existed long before the Industrial Revolution, the development of the factory system led to a rapid increase in both the number of cities and the size of their populations. People from very diverse backgrounds worked together in the same factory. At the same time, many people shifted from being producers to being consumers. For example, families living in the cities had to buy food with their wages because they could no longer grow their own crops to consume or to barter for other resources. Similarly, people had to pay rent for their lodging because they could no longer exchange their services for shelter. Unit 33. Number 02. The qualities that are advantages to storing your information locally on your computer can also be viewed as disadvantages. For example, when you store your information in the cloud, you are dependent on a remote server that you don't control. In theory, your data is accessible to you anywhere you have an internet connection. In reality, there could be times when it's unavailable to you, either because the server is down or because you don't have internet access. If your information is stored locally, it is in your control, and you have it as long as you have your computer or access to your computer. However, you are responsible for backing it up and keeping it secure from hacking and information theft. Similarly, it might be harder to share your information with family or coworkers if you store it locally, but that could also mean you're able to keep your information more private. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 34. Number 1. Because elephant groups break up and reunite very frequently, for instance, in response to variation in food availability, reunions are more important in elephant society than among primates. And the species has evolved elaborate greeting behaviors, the form of which reflects the strength of the social bond between the individuals, much like how you might merely shake hands with a long-standing acquaintance but hug a close friend you have not seen in a while, and maybe even tear up. Elephants may greet each other simply by reaching their trunks into each other's mouths, possibly equivalent to a human peck on the cheek. However, after long absences, members of family and bond groups greet one another with incredibly theatrical displays. The fact that the intensity reflects the duration of the separation as well as the level of intimacy suggests that elephants have a sense of time as well. To human eyes, these greetings strike a familiar chord. I'm reminded of the joyous reunions so visible in the arrivals area of an international airport terminal. Unit 34. Number 2. We cannot predict the outcomes of sporting contests, which vary from week to week. This heterogeneity is a feature of sport. It is the uncertainty of the result and the quality of the contest that consumers find attractive. For the sport marketer, this is problematic, as the quality of the contest cannot be guaranteed, no promises can be made in relations to the result, and no assurances can be given in respect of the performance of star players. Unlike consumer products, sport cannot and does not display consistency as a key feature of marketing strategies. The sport marketer therefore must avoid marketing strategies based solely on winning, and must instead focus on developing product extensions such as the facility, parking, merchandise, souvenirs, food, and beverages rather than on the core product, that is, the game itself. Unit 34 Exercises. Number 01. Suppose that one night you and your spouse are preparing dinner. Suppose, 2, that midway through the preparations, your spouse discovers that you forgot to buy the dinner's most important ingredient. Suppose then that your spouse grabs the car keys, curls a lip, frowns at you, and hisses, "I'm going to the store." Nearly everyone with an intact brain would understand two things about the words just uttered. First, your spouse is heading to the supermarket. Second, your spouse is angry. Your left hemisphere figured out the first part, that is, it decoded the sounds and syntax of your spouse's words and arrived at their literal meaning. But your right hemisphere understood the second aspect of this exchange, that the ordinarily neutral words "I'm going to the store" weren't neutral at all. The frowning eyes and the hiss of the voice signal that your spouse is angry. Unit 34. Number 02. When you drive to work you don't notice the traffic lights. You know some part of your mind was attending to them, along with other road users and the speed limit, but you often can't specifically remember doing so. In one study led by habit researcher Wendy Wood, participants reported exactly this vagueness about their habitual behavior. Wendy Wood. While they were hanging out, watching TV, or brushing their teeth, they reported thinking about what they were doing only 40% of the time. TV, 40%. It's one of the major benefits of a habit. It allows us to zone out and think about something else, like planning a trip on the weekend. Habits allow the conscious part of our minds to wander while our unconscious gets on with those tedious, repetitious behaviors. Habits help protect us from decision fatigue, the fact that the mere act of making decisions depletes our mental energy. Whatever can be done automatically frees up our processing power for other thoughts. The end. Good job. Let's start. Unit 35-12. Number 102. For quite some time, science educators believed that hands-on activities were the answer to children's understanding through their participation in science-related activities. Many teachers believed that students merely engaging in activities and manipulating objects would organize the information to be gained and the knowledge to be understood into concept comprehension. Educators began to notice that the pendulum had swung too far to the hands-on component of inquiry as they realized that the knowledge was not inherent in the materials themselves, but in the thought and metacognition about what students had done in the activity. We now know that hands-on is a dangerous phrase when speaking about learning science. The missing ingredient is the minds-on part of the instructional experience. Clarity about the knowledge intended in any activity comes from each student's recreation of concepts and discussing, thinking, arguing, listening, and evaluating one's own preconceptions after the activities, under the leadership of a thoughtful teacher, can bring this about. After all, a food fight is a hands-on activity, but about all you would learn was something about the aerodynamics of flying mashed potatoes. Our view of what students need to build their knowledge and theories about the natural world extends far beyond a hands-on activity. While it is important for students to use and interact with materials in science class, the learning comes from the sense-making of students' hands-on experiences. 14. Unit 35-12. 0304. Unlike coins and dice, humans have memories and do care about wins and losses. Still, the probability of a hit in baseball does not increase just because a player has not had one lately. 4 outs in a row may have been bad luck, line drives hit straight into fielders' gloves. This bad luck does not ensure good luck the next time at bat. If it is not bad luck, then a physical problem may be causing the player to do poorly. Either way, a baseball player who had 4 outs in a row is not due for a hit, nor is a player who made 4 hits in a row due for an out. If anything, a player with 4 hits in a row is probably a better batter than the player who made 4 outs in a row. Likewise, missed field goals need not be balanced by successes. A poor performance may simply suggest that the kicker is not very good. Being rejected for jobs does not make a job offer more likely. If anything, the evidence is mounting that this person is not qualified or interviews poorly. Not having a fire does not increase the chances of a fire. It may just be the mark of a cautious homeowner who does not put paper or cloth near a stove, put metal in the microwave, leave home with the stove on, or fall asleep smoking cigarettes. Every safe airplane trip does not increase the chances that the next trip will be a crash. Unit 35-12 Exercises. Number 0102. Imagine that your customer is in an upset mood. He has a sharp edge to his voice as you get to make your presentation. Many salespeople would attempt to get him out of his mood with enthusiasm or a cheery story. In fact, the converse is a good rule of thumb. When in doubt, pace your client. If your client has an edge in his voice, let your voice have an edge. If he sounds angry, let yourself be angry, but only briefly, with something that occurred today as well. This vocal pacing will help put you in sync with your client. Eventually you will lead your client out of the negative frame of mind, if you choose to. There is more that you can do with your voice than match the tone of your client. We all speak with a measurable average number of words per minute. Many people drawn to the sales profession speak quickly. Part of this experience is due to the nature of the business. We have to be quick and to the point. Unfortunately, if your client speaks slowly and you are speaking quickly to meet a time constraint, you will probably lose the sale. People tend to speak at a rate that is consistent with how they process their thoughts and internal representations. If people tend to think in pictures, movies, they tend to speak very quickly. People who tend to speak very slowly process information through their feelings and emotions. In between are people we call the radio announcers who speak with more rich voices and normally think in words. Your ideal is to speak in the same rate and pitch of voice as your client. Unit 35-12. Number 0304. The best thing fire did was cook. Foods that humans cannot digest in their natural forms such as wheat, rice, and potatoes became staples of our diet thanks to cooking. Fire not only changed food's chemistry, it changed its biology as well. Cooking killed germs and parasites that infested food. Humans also had a far easier time chewing and digesting old favorites such as fruits, nuts, insects, and meat if they were cooked. Whereas chimpanzees spend 5 hours a day chewing raw food, a single hour suffices for people eating cooked food. Fire also opened the first significant gap between man and the other animals. The power of almost all animals depends on their bodies, the strength of their muscles, the size of their teeth, the breadth of their wings. Though they may harness winds and currents, they are unable to control these natural forces, and are always constrained by their physical design. Eagles, for example, identify thermal columns rising from the ground, spread their giant wings and allow the hot air to lift them upwards. Yet eagles cannot control the location of the columns, and their maximum carrying capacity is strictly proportional to their wingspan. When humans domesticated fire, they gained control of an obedient and potentially limitless force. Unlike eagles, humans could choose when and where to ignite a flame, and they were able to exploit fire for any number of tasks. Most importantly, the power of fire was not limited by the form, structure, or strength of the human body. The end. Good job. Now, let's start. Unit 3613. Number 103. The colors of the trees looked like they were on fire, the reds and oranges competing with the yellows and golds. This was Nina's favorite season, but she remained silent for hours while Marie was driving. Nina, Marie. Nina had been heartbroken after losing her championship belt. Nina. Now a former champion, she was thinking of retiring from boxing. Marie, her longtime friend and trainer, shared her pain. Marie. After another silent hour, Marie and Nina saw a sign, Sobel Falls. Marie Nina Sobel. Marie thought this would be a good place for them to stop. Marie. Marie pulled over into the parking lot. Marie. Marie and Nina went down a path to watch the falls. Marie Nina. Another sign, watch your step. Rocks are slippery. They found the falls spilling out in various layers of rock. No one was there except them. Look at them. Marie pointed to movement in the water moving toward the falls. Marie. Hundreds of fishtails were flashing and catching light from the sun, moving upstream. Beneath them in the water, they saw salmon slowly moving their bodies. While Marie and Nina kept watching the salmon, a big one suddenly leapt. Marie Nina. It threw itself up and over the rushing water above, but in vain. They were standing without a word and watching the fish struggling. Another jumped, its body spinning until it made it over the falls. Another one leapt and was washed back by the power of the water. Watching the salmon, Marie noticed Nina fixing her eyes on their continuing challenge. Marie Nina. Nina's heart was beating fast at each leap and twist. Nina. Then, with a great push, a small one turned a complete circle and made it over the falls. He made it. Nina shouted at the success with admiration. Nina. More salmon then followed and succeeded. She felt ashamed to be looking at them. After a moment, she turned to Marie and said, "Giving up is not in my vocabulary. Marie. Marie, I'll get my championship belt back." Marie. Marie nodded with a bright smile. Marie. Our training begins tomorrow. It's going to be tough. Are you ready? Walking up the path and back to the car, they could still hear the fish splashing in the water. 18. Unit 3613. 0406. Once upon a time there was a king of Armenia, who, being of a curious turn of mind and in need of some change, sent his men throughout the land to make the following proclamation. Hear this. Whatever man among you can prove himself the most outrageous liar in Armenia shall receive an apple made of pure gold from the hands of His Majesty the King." People began to swarm to the palace from every town and village in the country, people of all ranks and conditions, princes, merchants, farmers, priests, rich and poor, tall and short, fat and thin. There was no lack of liars in the land, and each one told his tale to the king. None of those lies, however, convinced the king that he had listened to the best one. The king was beginning to grow tired of his new sport and was thinking of calling the whole contest off without declaring a winner. Then there appeared before him a poor, ragged man, carrying a large sack over his shoulder. "What can I do for you?" asked His Majesty. "Sire," said the poor man, slightly bewildered. "Surely you remember? You owe me a pot of gold, and I have come to collect it." "You are a perfect liar, sir!" exclaimed the king. "I owe you no money." "A perfect liar am I," said the poor man. "Then give me the golden apple." The king, realizing that the man was trying to trick him, said, "No, no. You are not a liar." "Then give me the pot of gold you owe me, sire," said the man. The king saw the dilemma. He handed over the golden apple. Unit 3613 Exercises. Number 0103. About 6 months ago, my boyfriend and I decided to move to another city where he had lived before. 6. He went ahead and moved into a one-bedroom apartment so that it would be easier for him to look for a job. It was hard for me, of course, because I missed him so much, but I had already given notice at my job and planned to follow him a month later. As time went by, however, nothing seemed to be working out. My boyfriend did not get a job, so he had been out of work for nearly a month. On top of that, I couldn't find anyone to take over my apartment. If I didn't find someone who could move in the day I was moving out, I would have to pay another 3 months' rent, which I could not afford. 3. Time and money seemed to be running out on us. When I was really desperate about a week before the final move, I purchased 3 wishing stones in a street shop. That night, while holding the stones in one hand, with the other I wrote down everything I wanted. I wished for a job for my boyfriend, and I wished that I could move into the apartment he had rented. Also, I wished for a nice person to move into my apartment on the day I would be leaving. I carried the stones in my jeans pocket so that every time I touched them, I thought about the list of things I had written. And guess what happened? A man called me about 5 days before I was going to leave, saying that he wanted to move into my apartment. And he even bought my washing machine, which I couldn't take with me and wanted to sell. I could move into the apartment my boyfriend had rented, and we had 2 weeks to feel at home in the beautiful new city before he signed a contract for a new job. 2. Unit 3613. Number 0406. A physician was once summoned to attend to an unusual case. He found a pale, sad, 17-year-old boy, reclining on a sofa, in an ornate room adorned with rich, silk tapestries. 17. His eyes were half closed, his head was bowed, and he was pale like a marble statue. Several doctors had been called to examine him and, unable to diagnose his condition, had concluded that his problem was psychosomatic. At a glance the doctor realized what was wrong with the boy. He suffered in his gilded cage, a self-absorbed prisoner, for he did not know what it was to go out to give happiness to those in need. The doctor asked him to get ready to go out with him. "With you?" asked the boy. "Where?" In an undertone, the doctor said to him, "That is a secret. I can only tell you that it is for your own good." The boy got ready and the doctor took him to a quarter where poor people lived. They carried with them many gifts in cash and kind. At the first house which they visited, the doctor had to help the boy to keep his balance as he walked. At the second, the boy went ahead of the doctor. At the third, he almost ran. When the children and the poor women thanked him, he cried with joy. The outing seemed too short to him. From then onwards, every day the boy searched for those whom he could make happy. He was restored to good health. He found joy and happiness, which did not dwell in his palatial home but in the broken cottages of the poor to whom he gave the love of his generous heart. Those of you who are frustrated with life, who feel unwanted, useless, and bored, try this same medicine, and there will be no end of real joy for you. The end. Good job.